Good evening and welcome to the Upset Podcast. Tonight we're talking about cults, culture or cultish. Coming up next. Hey, welcome back to the Upset Podcast. We are so happy that you tuned in this evening and we are live. So we can't wait to interact with you live tonight. And when I say I'm talking about these people.
True.
Hey guys.
Here we are.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. How's everyone doing?
It's good to be alive.
Amen. We
Good
can
to be alive.
Callie was dead last week, right?
I was.
Face looking all.
Oh, my lordy.
Look, he's looking pretty.
Oh, well, thank you, Marlena. I tell you. Go ahead. Use that prophetic gift. It shall be one day.
I love it.
Callie, do you usually you put on a little lip gloss? Do you put on any just now?
Yeah, normally what I just drag a pork chop across my
Right.
give it a little gloss, but yeah.
Oh, you guys are a mess. This is crazy. Yeah, it's been a busy week. We went from April to May last week, and it seems like
Did anybody tell the weather though?
I know, right? You sound like went from the 80s and 90s, 60s.
Why would it wait to the Sabbath to get cold again?
Yeah. I turned on the heat too.
I did today.
Yep.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I'm cold.
Me too.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for tuning in. How you
See
doing?
Mike?
That's right, Mike Williams.
Yeah, I miss the live audience. You know, when it's a few weeks, you almost feel like it's
Funny, people talking about the live audience.
Greetings.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
man.
they liked it?
Yeah. So people I talk to, at least unless they lying to me. But
I spent some time yesterday. I went up to Pine Forge Academy to hear my good friend Pastor Paul Anderson preach.
Right.
And I went to Walnut Street Church, and the folks there, all of them were saying how much they enjoy the podcast. And I just wanted to shout, our conference treasurer, who's the elder there,
Right.
but Sister Karen, who was so kind, and Sister Doreen Palmer. She was just really effusive and so affirming. Sister Doreen, thank you for those kind words.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
good people over there.
I love you.
I
Yeah.
was at the Miracle City Church,
Oh yeah, I heard.
Concert. Yeah.
Pine Forge. It was a fantastic.
That's what I heard. I heard if you missed it, you've missed it. That's it.
But everywhere, I'm moving around the floor, working with the teams, and people are stopping me saying, "Hey," and I said, "I'm looking at them like, who are you?" I saw you on the podcast. At least 5 people stopped me.
Yeah, Miracle too. They got a bunch of people in there.
It's you.
Maybe we can do the live show there when we
Somebody stop Tasha.
I mean, it's a nice stage,
Somebody talk about Paris. Let's see if Tasha will take us there.
Oh, the Eiffel Tower. There's somebody there.
Yeah.
Hi, maybe.
Tasha, we were waiting on you to say, "Oh, let's go live there."
Yeah,
Maybe right.
Okay.
I'm pro for anywhere that needs a passport.
I know, right? I know. Yeah, the real live audience. No, I loved it. And just seeing the reactions, because we see when people type things in the chat, but to see the live reactions to what we're talking about and how people are expressing their thoughts was really cool. So
yeah, I realize now that I say a lot of things that make people go, "Oh."
You just realizing that?
Yeah, my fault, Marlena. My fault, preacher.
You and Tally. Oh
Now, how did I get linked into
we're
that?
not in jail. We could be in jail or something, in prison.
I bring a reserved and conservative perspective to these ongoing discussions. And
Yeah.
you know,
Is he okay, everybody? Novella, just reach across too and just
It
check
made
his
Chuck
temperature.
disappear. Look at that.
It's good to be back, guys.
Yeah, man, this is it.
And I think we're excited. I always use the word excited too much, but we're looking forward to tonight's discussion because it's kind of a, I don't want to call it a hot topic, but it's one of those words we hear thrown around a lot, especially in various religious circles. And we're the upset. We like tackling these topics that we hear floating around, and so that's what we're going to do here tonight. And who better to tackle something like this than
somebody retired.
That's right. Somebody unemployed.
Exactly.
Hello, Harrison Hutcherson. All right. So without further ado, we throwing this over to you, Tally.
Well, let's get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. And it's always such a pleasure to spend this time with you. This has just been a great venue for us to talk about things of meaning and importance. And today, here at your favorite place for ongoing dialogue with the brightest minds and the sincerest hearts, we here at the Upset Podcast have a question that we feel is very relevant to Seventh-day Adventists. And that is this: when it comes to who we are as a community and when it comes to who we are as a fellowship, are we a Seventh-day Adventist culture or are we a Seventh-day Adventist cultish? Which one are we? Now, we want to give you some real transparency here and tell you why we're talking about this culture or cultish thing. And it starts from one gentleman in particular. Let me introduce you to Dr. Eric Mason. He's the pastor of Epiphany Fellowship right here in the city of Philadelphia. It's located just about 6 blocks away from the North Philadelphia Church at 17th and Diamond. Dr. Mason is very well known in the city and beyond. He is a scholar and the author of a plethora of books. And he is the kind of urban-centered pastor that you would appreciate. He's a fine gentleman. I want to say that from the onstart. He's written a bunch of books, but his latest book really landed with a thud. It's called Urban Apologetics: Cults and Cultural Ideologies, Biblical and Theological Challenges Facing Christians. And in that book, he lists some people that he considers to be a cult. Because of that, he was called on to a podcast where he began to talk with the host of that podcast and where he said that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a cult, not a Protestant denomination, but flat out cult. And he said it with loud tones, repeated himself and said, "I said what I said," and then said it some more. He made it very clear that he thought that Adventism was a cult, and it drew an extraordinary backlash from all over the country and even beyond the country. This pastor from right here in the heart of North Philadelphia drew a great deal of pushback from all sorts of groups. This group of 4 guys, I believe they're called the Defenders of Adventism, or some august and a loud name. And there were all sorts of people writing back and putting up videos saying, "Hey, we're not a cult," and arguing with Dr. Mason, on the interwebs, as the old folks like to say. Now, I want to be clear before we go any further here. Let me write a few disclaimers, because today we're going to talk about cults, but we're going to talk about it from the perspective of trying to understand what cults are. We are not. Now, I want to, from the onset, as we talk today, we're not going to criticize or bring a rebuttal to Dr. Mason's opinions or charges. We're not going to talk about his books or anything that he said. He is not our topic. He's a fine gentleman, but Dr. Eric Mason is not the hokey pokey. He is not what it's all about. Okay. So I want to really be clear about that. We're not going to be talking about him. We're not going to examine any particular Seventh-day Adventist doctrines in detail to see whether or not those doctrines make us a cult or not in detail anyway. We may at some point, but we won't be doing that today. We are not here as defenders of the denomination. We're not here to say we are the Seventh-day Adventists and we are not a cult or anything. And nor are we here to say, you know what, I think he got a point. We might be. Now, these things may come out in the conversation, but we need to hear to defend nor to approve. We're here to have a conversation about what it means to be a cult. And in doing so, we're not going to take the time to point fingers at other people and say, Dr. Mason, you cult yourself. I mean, that is not why we're here. Seeing that I've told you what we're not going to do, perhaps now I should tell you what we really do intend to do. And that is this. We're going to define what is meant by the word cult, and we'll talk about that for a little while. And then we'll offer a brief overview of cults throughout history, very briefly. It'll be part of our conversation. And then we'll zero in a little bit on how Adventism has been viewed by others when it comes to the issue of cultishness. We'll mention that a little bit. That'll be a part of our conversation. And last but not least, we'll be talking about what are the behavior patterns, what are the evidences of cultishness or cultic behavior. Okay, that's what we will do. So let's get right into it. And I won't be long before you because I really want to hear what our wonderful interlocutors of the topic will say today. Let's define this thing called cult, and it comes from the Latin word cultus, and that word means to caringly till the soil or to attend to something with great devotion. I mean, really quickly, guys, when you see the word cult, think of another word that has the word cult in it.
Cultivate.
Cultivate. And that's the word cultivate means to carefully tend to something or to train something or to try to develop something. What's the word?
Culture.
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 Mhm.
If somebody's in a laboratory, they'll try to culture something. Or building a culture means to caringly tend to behaviors and folkways and mores so that you can have certain traditions of value. That's where the word cult comes from. It did not have a pejorative meaning in the beginning. It has come to take on a pejorative meaning. We do find it in the Bible a couple of times, interpreted typically from the word heresis. And that word means simply to make a choice or to demonstrate an option. And you often will see it translated in the scriptures as sect or heresy. Let me give you a couple of examples of the scriptural use of the word cult. In Acts chapter 24:14, the Apostle Paul said, But I admit, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation, I admit that I followed the way which they call a cult. I worship the God of our ancestors. They were trying to say that Paul was doing some weird, crazy stuff. He said, No, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew, but you call it a cult, but I call it the way. And then later on, the Apostle Peter makes mention of the same word. He said there'll be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies. The Greek word heresis, once again, is the same word as cult. So it means anyone who's made a choice or demonstrated an option that takes them away from the mainstream. But when we're talking about religious groups and talking about cults, that takes on a sharper definition, particularly in our current world. It's a system or a group of people who practice excessive devotion to a figure, object, or belief or system, and they typically have a charismatic leader. Looking at that, we take a view of some world religious cults that have appeared over the years throughout the annals of history. For example, you wouldn't believe it, but Abraham was considered a cult leader at one time. He is given the name in Genesis Hebrew, Abraham the Hebrew. The first time the word is used, the word Hebrew means someone who has crossed over. And they called Abraham a Hebrew because he crossed over the great river Euphrates. In days gone by, people stayed on their side of the bank of the river. If you crossed over, people figured you were nuts. And Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, and he became the guy who crossed over. He had a bunch of followers with him. He was a cult leader to some. And then Jesus was considered a cult leader by his own people. In fact, that's what we find Paul defending himself against in the book of Acts, because they considered Jesus to be the leader of a cult. Christianity was a Jewish cult. And then we go further than that. In the 7th century, the prophet Muhammad was considered the leader of a cult. And then a little bit later on in the 1800s, a gentleman by the name of Baha'u'llah became the leader of the Baha'i faith. They were considered an Islamic cult. And then in the United States of America in the 1930s, Wallace Fard Muhammad began to teach from the Quran. At least he said he was teaching from the Quran, and developed a group of people now known as the Nation of Islam. And then Elijah Muhammad came along following him and led the group. And every once in a while in the airports, we would see these people in saffron robes chanting the Hare Krishnas, led by Swami Prabhupada in the 1960s. Well, you always find different cults around. But they began to zero in on Christian cults in the middle of the 20th century. Let me introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Anthony Hoekema. Dr. Hoekema was a Calvinist theologian and professor who wrote the book, The Four Major Cults. And in writing that book, he began to delineate what made a Christian group a cult rather than a Christian denomination. First thing he said is they have an extra scriptural source of authority. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, I'll just leave that right where it is, an extra scriptural source of authority. And then he says that cults deny justification by grace alone. Christian cults, they deny justification by grace alone. And then they devalue the work and the divinity of Jesus the Christ. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses say that Jesus was a created being. And they say, that's cultic. So that's another thing. I'll bring that back to you right at the end. But going forward, Christian cults see themselves as an exclusive community of the saved. In other words, they're more saved than anybody else. And in fact, some of them say you can't be saved unless you're a part of us. And a cultic group also features themselves as a central player or the central focus in last day events. Extra scriptural source of authority. They deny justification by grace alone. They devalue the divinity of Christ and also his redemptive work. They see themselves as an exclusive community of saved people, and they are central when it comes to eschatology. In other words, the last day events, they're featured. They're the ones that God is focusing on. And because of that, Dr. Hoekema said there are four groups that he considered to be not Christian groups, but to be cults. And they were Christian Scientists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Latter-day Saints, who we call Mormons, and the Seventh-day Adventists. Well, as you might imagine, that rankled the feathers and raised the hackles on quite a few. And people were sent to talk to him and to talk to another gentleman by the name of Dr. Walter Martin, who wrote another book called The Kingdom of the Cults. And they talked about the facts. Wait a minute, Adventists don't do all of those kind of things. And some people say, yes, they do. And Walter Martin finally says, you know what? Now that I look at it, Seventh-day Adventists may not be a cult after all. It's been going back and forth since that time. Some say, yes, they are. Some say, no, they're not. Well, forget all about what people believe. Ask yourself, how do cults behave? You don't have to know what they believe, but try to figure out how they behave. And cultic behavior is pretty clear to see. I did a lot of research on this, and these were some of the points that I distilled that I share with you now. The first thing about cultic behavior is that they always have a charismatic authority figure, always, living or dead. There's some personality that gets viewed as being central to the organization and to their mission. They tend to isolate their members from outsiders, the others, the people who are not them. They have an us and them mentality. Cultic behavior tends to do that. They are very exclusivistic. And in other words, if you really want to be saved, you got to be with us because, there's no salvation by any other name except ours. So they're exclusive. And they tend to have observable behaviors that link you to the group, things that you do or don't do that show you are a part of them. That's one of the other signs of cultic behavior. The last couple is they have a very strong resistance to questioning and an even stronger resistance to independent thought or action. In other words, we do things, not you do things. And don't be questioning a whole lot of stuff. The Lord showed us, just take it whole cloth. Okay? So those are the things that they do. So when it comes to considering if a group is a cult, and we're wrapping it up now, these are the things that we need to keep in mind. The questions that we need to ask ourselves when it comes to whether or not a group is a cult, whether or not we're a cult, is not so much typically just what we believe. But here are the questions. Let me just run through them again, and then we'll turn it over to the brightest minds and the most articulate of tongues here on the Upset Podcast. Do we have an extra scriptural source of authority? Do we deny justification by grace and faith alone? Do we devalue the divinity or the redemptive work of Christ? Do we consider ourselves to be an exclusive community of saved individuals? Do we perceive ourselves to be central figures when it comes to eschatology? In other words, when it comes to last day events, are we the central players, the central figures? And then last but not least, we ask ourselves behavior traits. I wrote that twice. I didn't mean to do that. Folks, forgive me. It must have been really meaningful to me. But here are the behavior traits we need to question. Do we have a charismatic authority figure that we focus on? Do we tend to isolate our members from outsiders? Are we exclusivistic? Do we say that you got to remain in our group or your salvation is at risk? Do we have observable behaviors that link us to the group? So when you look at somebody and say, yeah, he's one of us, like a motorcycle gangster wearing the colors. And do we resist questioning authority? And do we try to enforce uniformity? Those are the questions that you need to consider. And ladies and gentlemen, don't trouble your minds and hearts with this, because we have the brightest of individuals who are before you right now, empaneled as the Upset Podcast panel to lead you further into this discussion about cults and cultic behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, I turn it over to them and ask, what say them one? What say them all? Is we culture or is we cultish?
So Meg said, no pressure, guys. No pressure.
No, I really appreciated that breakdown, Tally. I think that was helpful to have that context. But, even as you were talking, I was thinking about, when you mentioned the author and how he broke down his definition, or, it just made me think how anybody can take any entity, any word, and define it for themselves. So, we had that definition that we get from the dictionary, but then you have scholars who will take it and go a little deeper. And so it makes me think, just because someone can eloquently quote what makes something doesn't mean that something is that thing. You know what I mean? I think that's what I was thinking. I was like, I could write a book and define what I think a cult is. I mean, I'm sure no one would buy it, but you know what I'm saying? So,
wouldn't buy it, Tasha.
Oh, thank you. So I just, it's subjective in some ways, but I was also thinking about my first introduction to cult, like hearing the word cult and just my initial reaction to them. And I always associated it with that, like you said, the charismatic leader, but also this element of secrecy. Like, only the people involved know what's really happening. And then, after something big happens, then people come and reveal what the leader was telling them. And that's one of the reasons, I know we're not here to defend, but that's one of the reasons, when I hear, different denominations, being, viewed as cults, I'm like, a lot of denominations are very clear about their belief system. So I don't really get that part, because I think that's something that most religious systems, but is that to say we have some that we publish and some that you have to come inside and then you find out? Is that what?
Well, there is in Washington, D.C., this place called the E.G. White Vault. Just thought I'd share that.
I happen to like the vault. And I've been to the vault. No, I've been to the vault in Andrews University. I've been to the vault.
There's some things you can't read in the vault.
That's true. I agree with that too. There's some you can't. But I also, let's be honest now, I as you were going through it, and as we have discussed it, I start to ask myself some internal questions. I'm gonna die in Adventist. I was born in Adventist. I was supposed to be born on Camp Victory Lake grounds, so I know I'm called to it. But on the flip side of it, certain things start to bother me because of the way that we coin certain phrases, the way that we, the hardest thing that you put out there for us was the extra scriptural
authority.
source of authority because some people say it's Ellen G. White. Let's just say it. Ellen G. White and the Bible, or Ellen G. White and the Bible, and they both work hand in hand. Mm-hmm. We kind of got to be careful with that because she herself said that if you're reading the Bible, and I'm paraphrasing, if you're reading the Bible and you're into the Bible, you won't need the quote unquote lesser light, which she hasn't called herself a lesser light. She has not. But I think one of the other problems that we have is that we look at the gift of prophecy as just her, where the gift of prophecy is larger than she is. And
who else is included in that?
The gift of prophecy?
Yeah. If it isn't just her, I mean, you were saying it's much larger. Who else do we include, Pat?
Jesus?
The testimony of Jesus Christ.
No. I and I'm not even trying to be funny, but I mean, it starts from Genesis 3:15, and it works its way all the way through the Bible. As far now, Tally, don't play with me today, okay? I'm just saying that not today, but I have to tell you, guys, it scares me sometimes. That do I believe some of the things that I believe simply because it was taught to me that way? And do I use certain idioms or certain language structures just because I'm used to it? Or do I really believe it? And it's frightening sometimes. It's frightening.
I believe that basically it boils down to human behavior, because the Republicans and the Democrats could be a cult.
Man, he went all the way there.
There's a charismatic leader.
It's true.
If you're not in a blue state, you're in a red state. There's division there. They create all of that. So as you defined for us, and I really don't think we should go into trying to, defend the Adventist church and this is why we do this, so forth and so on. It basically boils down to human behavior. It's behavior. It's one human being controlling another human being. And you can add all of the different references as to who's right, who's wrong, whatever. I mean, there's a long list of societal grouping that could classify as a cult, and I think we will err by digging into who's right scripturally, who's not. Is Ellen White relevant? Whatever. It is how we treat each other. One of the things you hit on, Tally, was this exclusivity and barring people from leaving the group, right? Okay, and threatening them if they do. That's human behavior. And you can find those traits of human behavior in almost any organized group. But I think today when people think of cults, they think of the most egregious and violent versions where people are drinking poison and they're telling people that if you don't do this, you will never see heaven, and giving dates, when Jesus is coming back. We can just go on and on and on with the variations. I want to drill down to how do people treat each other. So if you want to highlight the Adventist church, how do we treat each other?
But Chuck, if I might also add, when Tally listed those characteristics of a cult, and it spoke about us not agreeing on the grace of God alone for salvation. And I think it comes down, I mean, we know that we are saved by God's grace. And I think they're choosing because we are Sabbath keepers, so we are law abiding, right? So we believe more in the law than in God's grace. And I think that we as a people sometimes have to watch to make sure that we don't go too far to the right in how we express our faith, because sometimes people can feel that way because of things that individuals say. And I think we must have that strong relationship with Jesus Christ so that we stay balanced and not go too far. So I'll give you a prime example. Our health message is to really be a benefit for all people, just to live better and to have healthful lives so that we can live as long as, God intends for us on the earth. But some people will then take that and make it a salvific thing to where people feel that if they don't if they eat certain things or drink certain things, they can't be saved. And so, but that's not the faith. Is someone erroneously taught them that, who went too far to the right. So I think that that's an issue that we must be careful of. Also, the issue of Jesus not being, Tally, did you say something about like totally
Divinity.
divine?
Yeah.
What did you say about that?
Right. One of the signs is that occultic groups devalue the divinity of Christ and the redemptive work of Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know that Jesus saves, and only salvation comes through Jesus Christ, and that he is the one coming back for us, and he is the one, that's we will be with, in the new Jerusalem, he and the Father, so I think some people, they don't understand, because when we read the word and we see that Michael stands up, that Jesus, I mean, to me, if you're God, you can be anybody you want to be. You can speak from a bush, you can do all these other things, but that doesn't devalue you. So, I mean, some things are just erroneously wrong, but that people perceive of us. But I just want to make sure that we as a people, that we are balanced Christians, and that when we portray ourselves to others, when people join our church, that they see Jesus Christ and him alone. And I know stories where that was not done, and so hence you can get all kind of erroneous stories as to the foundation of what the whole faith believes versus someone who has gone too far to the right in their thinking.
Hmm.
I think that brings up this whole idea of culture. I think a lot of times we ascribe certain beliefs to doctrine, and not looking at this is our interpretation of doctrine, or this is how we go about things because this is how we feel, based on what we've read we should live our lives, but they're not necessarily in and of themselves salvific, as you said. I mean, it makes me think about how you go into some homes and they ask you to take your shoes off, because they believe in you shouldn't walk around, and there's certain cultures where that's what they do, and that's how they feel strongly about it. But to say to someone, if you don't take your shoes off, you're wrong, and you're not, it's like it's developed because that is your preference. That's your interpretation based on what you've learned and how you would like things to be. But to put others down because they don't do that, or to say, you're going to be without because you don't follow what I believe, I think that's the difference. If I'm making sense here.
Well, I remember speaking to a theologian. Say that again, Chuck. I'm sorry.
No, I said it still branches to behavior.
Behavior.
It's
Yeah,
behavior.
but
How we interpret our culture or gang or group.
Say that
Okay.
again. Gang.
All right. One of the characteristics of a cult
Mm-hmm.
isolates its members
Sure.
and suggests to its members that if you're not in and you're out, then you're corrupt. Now, you can go back to the SDA mode of operation if you want to, but it's behavior. How many times I personally have seen people turned away from coming to church, being a Christian, not necessarily an Adventist, because of the way they are treated. The way they're treated. I mean, one of my own sons was told by a Bible worker in our church that if he did not attend church weekly, that he would burn in hell.
Okay, well, there's one.
And the Lord said, there you go.
Well, that's that little too far thing, way too far.
Mhm.
It's it's like as we were talking, I'm thinking to myself, things that are conservative or strict, are things that are considered conservative or strict cult. So our friends, the Jehovah's Witness, were on that list that Callie presented. And it took my mind back to the fact that we see our Jehovah's Witness brothers and sisters canvassing on the street, knocking doors, They are the forerunners for it. Okay. Now they have some very strict guidelines in their faith.
Sure.
And I remember one time, one of my loved ones was a private duty nurse and accompanied their client to one of the meetings in the Jehovah's Witness, in the Kingdom Temple or whatever it's called, and the Kingdom Hall. And in order to go, the client said, well, you can't just wear your scrubs. We need you to put on this dress. And it was like a muumuu, a muumuu, like a long house dress, like down to the ankles. And the person went because they were accompanying the client, but they stated how uncomfortable they felt sitting there, cloaked down, when the scrubs showed I'm at work, I'm here accompanying at work, but they had to cloak them down. Does that look cultish, or is it culture, or is it conservative?
I think one of the things we want to do is and not to step past the question, because I'll get right back to it. Being a cult is not necessarily a bad thing.
That's what I was going to say.
I mean, Christianity was a cult at one time. So being a cult is not necessarily a bad thing. The question becomes, as Chuck was saying earlier, what is the behavior? I mean, the cultic behavior, what does it lead to? And Novella's question about when you tell people you have to dress like this to represent us, is that cultic? It is cultic. It's not necessarily bad, but it is cultic. And whenever you tell somebody that we have at least a standard of attire that we will adhere to, that is cultic behavior. It's not necessarily bad. And a lot of people, when you hear an Adventist say, I remember, one of our greatest preachers, Elder C.D. Brooks, preached that sermon, I want my church back.
My church back.
Yeah, you got to say it right. You got to drag out that bag.
Yeah, I'm not that good.
I won't much. I mean, I used to practice that, man. But
and with him, it's not church; it's church.
Yeah, I want my church back.
Can I?
But before, I mean,
go ahead.
What they really mean is they liked the day, and I would hear it. I would hear it at my church at West, where you knew a Seventh-day Adventist when you looked at them.
Right.
In other words, their faces were plain. They didn't have earrings on and stuff like that, because cults like to have, just like a gang says you got to wear our colors, a cult says we want to be able to recognize you. That may not be bad. Okay, I'm back, Pat.
No, because I agree with you, and I think it's because of the way I grew up in it, and I didn't say that I was born in this for a form of fashion. I don't know any other church. Matter of fact, it's just recently, being through Pelk and all of that I started to even listen to other preachers, because for me, it was a crime, a spiritual crime, to listen to another preacher or even to read other books that was out there that didn't come from the Review and Herald. So it's, and I'm not joking about that. I'm serious. So, why I'm feeling this way is because on one case, I don't mind being a part of that cult. I don't mind being a part of it, because that was something that, and I'm going to say it, Chuck, that kept my behavior one way. Right. Because if you're going to rebel against something, you have to rebel against something. What is it that you're rebelling against? And most of us do not rebel on the word of God. We rebel on the teachings that we think is that we were taught. We rebel more on what we were taught than anything else. So right now you go to Novella's church, and I'm not even joking, they'll go out on a Saturday and they'll help people on the street, etc., whatever.
What does that mean when you say help people on the street?
Well, they'll help people. I mean, if it means cleaning, if it means whatever, they'll help.
Y'all do you guys do janitorial service on Sabbath?
Not at your house, Tally. I'm just talking about in her community, and I'm using that as an example, that there's something. Don't go down there and start trying to figure out ways to fire her, you cultish people. What I'm saying, what I'm really saying is that there's so many different ways of looking at it. And even though, Chuck, you're saying it's a behavioral thing, I grew up thinking my cousin, who was not an Adventist, as kids growing up, is going to be lost. because they didn't keep the Sabbath or because they didn't dress a certain way. We grew up thinking that. I remember driving down
How you
Pitkin
were
in Brooklyn.
indoctrinated.
What you said, Chuck?
That's how you were indoctrinated.
Yeah. And believe it or not, being in my 50s, there's still some things that I got to throw out without throwing out the whole bathwater. And I think that's where we have to be careful of, because we hear the word cult and we say, that's a negative connotation right off the back. Well, there's another side of it that I'm kind of proud of. You know what I mean?
No, that's what I was asking about culture as well as conservative.
Okay.
You know, so some of the, like Jehovah's Witness, they just wanted a long dress because they find that to be appropriate. And so that is what they find to be appropriate. And it's not that it's necessarily wrong. That's just their view of appropriate. And so when we think about the word cult, looking at it in the light of it's not necessarily a negative term until someone puts the additives and makes it negative. But anything with rules or guidelines, do you find that people might then start to say that's a cult because they have too much guidelines or they have too much order and
if it's away from the norm. And I do want to say this, you know how the Jews had 10 commandments and then they turn out to be 613 laws for the people, right? And we can do that with our culture, with our traditions, that we make people think that it's a sin to do certain things when it has nothing to do with Christ. It has now become a tradition. And so we make that now a law with God. And that's why I think we go too far. And we should never have comparisons with we are only the right and everybody outside of us is wrong. Because that's when you really start to mess up. I mean, we have doctrinal beliefs that we hold true. And I believe them to be true, but people receive light differently and at different times. And I mean, our church does, have mistakes too, man. You go back to civil rights and slavery, and our church has a lot of darkness there, and so we must be careful to in our differences to demonize those who are different. And so that's what I know from us. I remember reading, sometimes I see on YouTube, why I left the Seventh-day Adventist church. Sometimes I used to get mad about it, right? I wouldn't listen to him. And one time I decided to listen, and man, what the lady said, I could see that she was probably telling the truth. And it was going way too far to the right that we push people away who simply want to get to know Jesus, in a fuller way. But then we come up with some off color thing that we now believe to be a salvific issue. And it has nothing to do with salvation. So that's why my point is today that we have to stand for the things of Jesus Christ. You can never go wrong. The lady says, I met Jesus Christ outside of the Adventist church. And I believe that that's a possibility because of the things we believe. We push that more than Jesus Christ. And for some people, it's the end time. Faith in the end times are true is information as to, what's going to happen with all these governments and things. And so some things that we need to know. But when you push that more so than salvation, people understanding God's grace for them and how he died for them, they never hear that or hear it every little now and then, it can make us look, a certain way. That's why I say, and I want to make sure from my point of view, what you understand today is to know Jesus Christ for yourself and personally, and don't demonize anyone else who's different. And know that God has people all over the earth. And because he's not coming back for faith, he's coming back for people who are right for him in whatever faith that is. And so we have to be careful when we say people can't come in our churches doing such things, they can't preach in our pulpits, do this. We have to be be careful. And I want to reach somebody out there, because we hold those things to be true, and our 28 fundamental beliefs have become 613.
Let me ask, I mean, and then I want to get to Miggs's question. And language, and this is, and I think Miggs raised this one. Language will tell you a lot about a group of people, because language tells you how they really think, and thinking, becomes action after a while.
Yeah.
What Marlena just said about not being exclusive and so forth. When you say, okay, folks can be saved anywhere, but we're the remnant church, we are it. Doesn't that create a level of exclusivity? And for example, when you draw the picture of all of the other churches are the daughters of Babylon, and they will chase us into the woods one day. I mean, doesn't that? I mean, see, it's hard to think that way and not act towards people with a level of suspicion.
And Tally, is the way we talk. I'm sorry, guys. It's the way we talk, right? We're born to talk that way. They have these jokes or whatever on social media. What would you? How would you know this lady is about to do a testimony? You know what I mean? Or how she testify? What are the words that they're going to use next? If you're a Christian or you're a Black Christian, you will know, God is the head of my life, and et cetera, how we begin. In Adventism, there is a way that we speak to each other that can cause someone else that's with us to seem like an outsider, even if we don't say that they're an outsider. Yes, Chuck, I do agree with you that it comes down to behavioral, because I was talking to my church yesterday, and I said, "Excuse me for using this term, Sunday people," and I think it was okay that I used it, but I wanted to show that it's not even a good term to use, to say Sunday people. It's a negative thing, but we've learned to say that. Or not Sunday people, first day people.
First day people.
We'll say first day people.
Here's another one. I mean, when you talk about Dark County evangelism, that's a county you got to go to it because the gospel hasn't gotten it.
The county line, did the sun disappear?
Right.
And I remember at CUC, one of their off-campus students was in there, and they were talking about Dark County evangelism, and the student said, I live in that county, and my church is there.
My church
is there. How can you say the gospel hasn't reached there when my church is there? And they realize that for our community, if the Adventist message hasn't gone somewhere, it's still in darkness. Is that an exclusive way of thinking? Or is it just the truth?
I just say, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but rules, behavior. Rules, behavior.
But rules lead to behavior.
Okay, look at the conflict now about the Middle East. You have Palestinians, Israelis, Zionists. They all have rules. They all have reason. They always, and we, as a result of that, we treat each other a certain way. Even when a person doesn't subscribe, we still treat them because they're the world, the outside. And it governs our behavior. And quite frankly, I don't think the Lord is pleased with that. In the process of being exclusive, we become separatists. We become like a sect, a club.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Club does this.
Chuck, can I play?
You do this, you're not in the club.
Chuck, okay, that's what I was going to say. Chuck, can we play devil's advocate?
Oh, you're playing devil's advocate now?
I'm wearing red. Let's go. I mean, no. What I'm saying is that isn't that what we want to be? Don't we want to be set aside? Don't we want to be different? Don't we want to look different?
It is the nature of human pathology. We want to be exclusive. We want to have the shinier car. We want to have the more expensive bracelet or watch. Because we want to be exclusive. That's human nature.
So, you know what? I've heard oftentimes individuals say that we have terminology that will confuse others. Like when we say happy Sabbath. And I said, is there something wrong with saying that? Like, it's okay to say happy Sabbath, but some people, well, if someone's there and they don't know what that is, and I'm like, but that opens up, how I like to say, for conversation. That opens up for conversation. What's
Right.
happy Sabbath mean? And then you
Right.
get into all of this conversation about what the Lord provided for us with the day of rest.
Right.
And that's not because I'm Adventist. That's in the Bible. So I'm not doing weird things. Not weird.
Right.
But
Right.
I've heard people when they're trying to do the right thing by ensuring that the church environment is inclusive, maybe push out one or two things that can be helpful, in my small opinion regarding it.
Yeah.
And if I can say to what you were saying, Pat, I mean, Jesus is the light. And when you're in a dark world, the light is going to shine. And that's the attraction that is different from darkness, right? But you got to watch what you call darkness, right? And so you can call light darkness because it looks different from how you are and mislabel. That's why, when Jesus says, let the wheat and the tares grow together, because sometimes you call, something that just might be a wheat tare at the time, erroneous or whatever, because he'll do the separating at the end. And so we in other words, in our faith, when we try to alienate ourselves, Jesus always mingled with people.
I agree.
He mingled with the different, so that, Tally, I'm telling you the truth. It's in the Bible. He mingled with it.
People have to
And
remember
so-
though, when Jesus mingled, everybody he was mingling with was Jewish.
But they were Jewish sinners.
Well, I mean, but they were all Jewish. I mean, so I always tell people that and very rarely did he meet people. For example, the Syrophoenician woman.
Get him, Novella. Come on, get him.
I mean, every once in a while he would meet people from outside, but everyone that Jesus dealt with was. Remember when he met the Syrophoenician woman, he reflected the attitude of the apostles by saying, "It's not meet for me to give the children's bread to the dogs." I mean, because
He was
that's
trying
how
to
they
teach
view.
them something.
Big
But what
pardon?
about he was trying to teach them something? Well, what was his
I agree.
whole purpose about the Good Samaritan? What was that about?
To
He was
show
trying
people.
to teach them.
Yeah, to teach them, that neighborliness is not determined by geography. Look,
To
I'm
be
with you
loving
on
to
it.
all people.
I'm with you on that. But what I'm asking is, what I'm reflecting on now is it cultic behavior? I mean, we did this survey back in the 80s where we showed that when a person joins the Adventist church within 5 years, their circle of friends that they used to have almost vanishes because we teach people a certain level of exclusivity.
Right.
Miggs asked the question. Let me blame Miggs on this.
Yeah.
Miggs said, are we attempting to brand ourselves away from the cluster? I mean, you know, and that happens. I'll give you a good example. In not calling our ministers reverend, it was based on the fact that everybody else called their ministers reverend, and we found a passage of scripture where it said that God's name was holy and reverend. And so we can't call our ministers reverend because
Reverend or reverend?
Reverend.
Reverend.
And I mean, what reverend simply means something that is, worthy of respectful reverence.
Mhm.
But we decided that we would just call ourselves elder instead of,
Far.
Bishop too. Novella, we were talking about that in the green room, right?
yeah.
Too far.
Novella has 2 churches. She's a bishop.
And truthfully, yeah. And a bishop is any overseer,
Right.
and so yeah.
Right.
But I mean, Miggs is asking the question: Are we in our attempt to be exclusive? Are we trying to brand ourselves separately from others as a matter of identification?
I feel like we are in a certain way, but more so less Adventist, but more Christian. I think, our mission is to call people out of sin into the glorious light, right? That's
Oh, snap.
Tasha, one of my good friends and a gentleman that I revere recently, Dr. Henry Wright, said, the Adventist church is not any other church. And we're calling people out of that into a level of truth that did not exist until we got here. And so it's not simply called. And I know a pastor who's well known to us who said the Adventist evangelism isn't simply about calling people out of sin. It's about calling people out of error.
Right.
In other words, we're here to call people out of the Presbyterian, Episcopal, Methodist,
No.
and into. No, I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
That's he was dead serious about this. He
Mhm.
said our job. He said our doctrine teaches that we are the end and the consummation of the Reformation, and our job is to call people out of these false systems into our quote true
I used to
system.
preach
And
it.
that heavily influences our behavior.
That influences our behavior, and I'm just
Greatly
asking,
so.
yeah.
Greatly so, because you can draw the analogy, again, pointing to human behavior with almost everything. I mean, evil is the author of the separation.
Okay.
So now, if we have different cultures, like if you go to Italy, we dress this way, we eat this kind of food, we teach our children a certain way. And here, a Westerner from the United States comes to that culture. They don't exclude you. They say, when you're in Rome, you know the old saying, you do as the Romans do. Okay. So it really does boil down to, we can take all our doctrines and we can take all of our teachings, and as good as we believe they are, and as spiritually correct that we believe they are, it should not translate into separatist behavior. That's what I'm saying. If someone disagrees with you, I disagree with the doctrines of some of them. Okay. But we don't have to ostracize them, or do we?
Can I just ask this question, Chuck? Because you're right. It does, and you're not oversimplifying it, because Jesus would have oversimplified it. I mean, honestly, right? He didn't even go to all of these rules and all of that, right? So here's the question that I want to ask. I remember, I think it's 1977, 78, one of those. I remember seeing the bodies strewn over in Guyana, Grenada, Guyana, right?
Yeah.
And I remember just saying, Dad, what happened? Oh, Jim Jones. We learn about Jim Jones.
Mhm.
Then in our era, I could say my era, where I was better able to understand. Now I'm hearing about the Branch Davidians,
Mhm.
Waco, what happened in Waco. And the majority of them that were in there were intellectual people coming out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Mhm.
That frightens me, because I wonder which speaker or which, you see, when I think you were talking about someone who's, help me, we have a figure that is, we follow a figure, a cult is someone.
Oh, an authoritarian, charismatic
Or-
authoritarian.
charismatic. That's
Or a
what
celebrity preacher.
or a celebrity preacher. You're exactly right. Or a celebrity preacher, where it's not Christ alone anymore. Now it's how I feel when I'm there. The braggadocious of, this is the church that I go to, this is what I believe, and this is what we believe. Why it frightens me sometimes, because I asked myself the question in 1992, if E.E. Cleveland would have brought us all to the top of Oakwood College Church on the steeple and told us to jump, how many of us would jump?
Right. Do you Cleveland impersonation?
I
Telling?
can't, because someone is going to call me.
You gotta jump.
and the only reason why I say that is because from the time that we have been discussing this in our meetings, it has actually done something to me spiritually. Where does my allegiance lie? Is it with the church and a belief system, my family's belief system? We're 4 generations of Adventism, or is it Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, and Cristo alone? And I know somebody's going to say, okay, Pat, it's Christ. It goes a little bit deeper than that. I mean, ingrained in me is, and there's some who's even listening now, ingrained in us is Adventism.
Well, let me show you. I mean, one of the is it Christ? Is Christ alone?
Mm-hmm.
Our salvation is Christ and Christ alone. Correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now here's a teaching.
Okay.
At some point, Christ leaves the sanctuary. He's not there for you anymore.
Allie, we'll talk about that next week.
Okay. I mean,
No, because you're right. I mean,
Yeah, I
but
mean,
you're
so
right.
that's just
I
something
should
to
let you
think
finish.
about.
I should let you finish. Go ahead.
No. I mean, because we said we weren't going to take any specific doctrine, so I don't want to get into it. But these are the kind of things you have to think about and say, now what kind of thinking does that lead to? You know, and how might others view that statement if Christ is not there for me, yet I am still saved and redeemed? How is that being actualized? You
How
see?
does that lead to the behavior?
How does that lead to? And ain't nothing worse than a person who thinks they've already passed through the judgment and declared right. You
Right.
know,
Goodness.
I mean,
You know,
those
I
people are
recently-
hard to pastor. You know,
Mhm. I recently read a Reddit thread. You're
I
familiar
know.
with that app, Reddit?
Mhm.
There's a Seventh-day Adventist or former Seventh-day Adventist Reddit thread.
Mhm.
And almost every complaint and reason why people said, hey, I'm done with the SDA church. I was born SDA. I grew up and my parents this and parents that and members this, that, and the other. Almost all of them refer to behavior, not questioning the doctrine, not questioning the Sabbath, not questioning Jesus Christ. It's how they're treated, that they don't want anything else to do with this church. Love Jesus, love God, but they have divorced themselves from the church because of how they're treated, not because they disagree with the doctrines and, I don't believe in the fourth commandment. Almost none of them question Scripture and the validity of Scripture and the belief in Jesus Christ and God, okay, God the Father. They just don't like to be treated the way they've been treated.
I do have a couple of comments. I'm sorry, chat. We've seen you putting in, like Gloria Dorsey, she was saying every denomination has a truth and ours seems to bring them all together, which made me think about the evangelistic series that we used to have growing up. They all had truth somewhere in the title, like, real truth, living truth. That was kind of our pull, and that, we were Bible believing. That, to me, when I was growing up, that's how I felt set apart. Like, we believe in everything in the Bible, and others don't. I mean, that's really how I interpreted. We are Bible based. Everything we believe is based on the Bible. But yeah, at the same time, I recognize how some of us use that to do some of the things that we're talking about in terms of saying, if you don't believe what we believe, that you're not really reading the Bible the way that you're supposed to. And at the same
Or
time,
you're not converted.
yeah, you're not converted, or the truth hasn't been revealed to you, and that's why you must come to us so we can reveal it to you.
There's no conviction. The word conviction is used. Conviction.
Right.
Right.
Conversion.
Latasha is running from her calling. Tally, can you hear the Adventist preacher in her? You hear it? Can you hear the idioms?
No, but honestly, like, I think every time we have this conversation, it just makes me think about how much I've witnessed. That's I don't want to say I've been indoctrinated, because I don't really like that.
You have been indoctrinated. You, as an Adventist, you are catechized.
Yeah.
I mean, our Sabbath school lessons it's not happenstance. We plan to go through a cycle of teaching.
That's right.
So that we can indoctrinate you over a certain period of time to those things that we perceive to be significant.
And it's a type of behavioral control. I mean, what does the song say? What does the song say? Those of us who follow Christ, we are Christ-centered. We're called Christians. And the song says, they will know we are Christians by our what?
Tithe.
Love.
Oh.
They will know we are Christians
by our skirts,
by our love,
by our chocolates,
by the length,
by the length. Yeah, the length.
But I think that comes with maturity and development. I think, as I got older, of course, as a child, you're following what your parents. I mean, you really don't have many choices, when you're living in a household. But as I became an adult, as I went to college, and it was on me to develop my own personal relationship with Christ and understand what I really believed as an Adventist versus anyone else, but mostly as a Christian first. I think that was important for me. There were some things I had to wrestle with myself to say, is this something that you're just used to, or is this something that you believe? And I just learned to read for myself, talk to God for myself. And that was one of the things I think was an epiphany for me in college. Can you believe it? It wasn't until I went to college that I realized
That's normally when it happens.
I can talk to God myself. Like, I don't have to listen to other people to tell me what I should be doing.
At least you caught yours early. I was in the ministry when
Oh, wow.
Let me ask Tally this question, if I could. I'm sorry, Tasha, were you done?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the characteristics.
what Natasha was saying is that she just became a Christian. That's what she was saying.
In a lot of writings about the characteristics of cults, one of the characteristics that I, in my own research, it says the way in which we make ourselves exclusive is that it increases the bonding as members who see themselves as threatened victims.
Yes. Yeah.
Are we threatened victims when we go running to the hills, or where is it we run?
Persecution.
Mountain.
Yeah, I mean the easiest way to find a running Negro is in the woods. I mean, if you really want to escape, you run to the projects because they will not find you because you look just like Raheem and Jamal. But you go out in the woods,
they wouldn't want to go there.
The deer and the antelope would say, he right over there, But if one of the things, Donald Trump has built a cult. One of the things that makes that cult functional is the idea that we are all being persecuted. He uses the language, I'm being persecuted for you. And when they get me, they're coming after you. The idea of common persecution forges ties with people. And when Adventists started preaching it, we were far from the only people saying that we're going to be persecuted and chased into the woods. It was a common theme among many different groups of people. The idea that we're going to be persecuted and chased into the woods, and
the Waldenses, all of those.
All of them. Yeah, it's a common thing.
I don't want to keep harping on this behavioral thing, but I want to give recognition and kudos to Tally because of your work with the community, other faith groups. You don't treat them like, oh, I'm this exclusive Seventh-day Adventist pastor who has done community work and worked in city administration. Really? I mean, I believe John Street was a Seventh-day Adventist when he was mayor of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Okay. So it goes back to behavior. How do you treat your non-Adventist colleagues, friends, family? How do you treat them?
Yeah, I know we're closing, but God gave us an opportunity for 3 years, 2.5 years. It was called the pandemic. Suddenly, we had to deal with people without the walls and the signs on those walls that told us how we were different from other people.
Yeah.
And during that time, people got to know each other in different ways, and new communities were built with online fellowships and all of that. But people became uncomfortable. Everybody kept saying, I can't wait to go back. I can't wait. Because people like those things with which they are familiar and that remind them of their identity. We have to learn, God doesn't give asterisk to his children, and if you insist on giving people asterisk, then you're going to find that God will burn you and your asterisks.
Yeah, we do.
And
we create asterisks.
Did I slip that one by, Pat? Did I?
I just
it slipped there.
That you in a cult, and we're going to talk about that cult that you in.
Well, this is a good conversation, folks, and we can talk specifics later on down the road. But
let me agree with
draw a line.
Real quick, let me agree with Chuck
on
this thing because I like to play the other side. I feel.
You can't say anything with that. Go ahead.
For all of our listeners, pray for Tally, please, and use his full name so that there's no mix up. Yes, you're right. It's the way we treat people. And I think that if we can just hone in on the truth of what would Jesus do, or how would he react, especially reaction, how would he react if, I think the world would be a whole lot different. I do believe that we ought to embrace some of Adventism. And I know we weren't here to talk about Adventism, we were here to talk about cults, etc. But there's certain part of the cult that I'm proud of. I'm proud of, and I still want to stand on that, as long as, Chuck, I'm not bringing anybody down. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not trying to be so exclusive that you can't be a part of, because I think we can be happy to have some of these, Ellen G. White, how we look at certain prophecies. I believe we could do that and still have people feel welcome into the fold. We need to do more of that instead of the opposite. So, Chuck, I was just hiding away from what you said in the very beginning, because after you made that statement, we could have just closed down right after that. Yeah, because it is true that we ought to be that.
It really does. I mean, and with all aspects of our life, it really does depend on your basic behavior. And God watches us and hears us and sees us as we interact with other human beings on earth, okay, that belong to different groups and different sects and whatever. I just think we can believe the Bible and have a spiritual experience and believe in God, but we need to be ultimately careful about how we treat people.
Yep.
That's the bottom line. I have had instances where I never mentioned that I was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, but that I was just a Christian. And people will gravitate to you because of your behavior. They say, "Oh, wow, you really treat us well. Oh, you talk to us well. You're a Seventh-day Adventist," as if to say, "That's not what Seventh-day Adventist." Right. So, if we get anything out of this, it's behavior. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church does not have to defend itself. Oh, we're not a cult. We're not gonna. We really should be saying we are a group of loving Christians. Period.
Until you chase me into the woods. Well, land the plane for us, Tosh.
Wow, this is one of those planes that it's like, how do you land it? But no, great dialogue. I think anytime we bring up topics like this, it's because we want people to, be willing to have the conversation, not being afraid to. Sometimes we think if we're questioning anything that we do, that even that is blasphemous. Like, but I think it's great. I do think the ultimate litmus test is, love God, love people. And a lot of, if what we're doing does not exemplify love for God or love for people, then that is probably a good sign that we're not going in the right direction. So that exclusive behavior that we were talking about, we need to reevaluate some things in terms of how we act.
And may I make this last statement only because I felt like I just need to say this to wrap up.
Wait, Chuck, before you do that, did she look at me when she just said that?
Be exclusive in our missionary minded. We want to spread the word and baptize more members and whatever. But I really think that if we treat people well and with love, you talk about conviction of the Spirit, people will be convicted and will ask questions like, "Hey, what about this? What about that? What about this doctrine? Hey, can I come visit your church? Can I be a part of your Sabbath school?" Sure. Because they're treated so well by you.
Sure.
As much as you can, a person will resist you. You say, "Okay, I understand. You're not there yet, but I still love you." Okay. And if you need anything, speed dial my number. That's the kind of attitude we should have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Goes back to that lead with love. I mean, I feel like we say that, but honestly, if we genuinely led with love, everything else will just fall into place.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, madam.
And thank you to our chat. I know we did not have a chance to display all of the comments, but thank you all for being a part of the discussion. And we have more topics to discuss in the month of May. So we invite you to come back next week and join us.
Yeah, I want to thank Tally for that breakdown. That was very educational.
It was fun. It was fun to do the research, and thanks, Charles.
And whatever, Tally. I'm better than Tally. Whatever.
Yeah, that's true. Miss Rita, you're right.
You do a good job of playing the devil's advocate.
Look what I got. Guys, did you see what I got?
Oh, wow.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Was that my cue to say?
No, it wasn't. I really like my shirt.
But no, I mentioned it last week that, we had our communication conference last weekend, and so many of those who attended patronized our Upset store. I was finally able to count everything, and we have enough for two, because I think we decided that, every $500 we would donate to a cause. And so we have enough now for 2 causes.
Oh, wow.
So we're looking, if you guys have a cause, our audience out there that you like us to, who could benefit from, they're in an upsetting situation and need a hand. Upset is here to help. So just let us know, and we'll see how we can assist. But thank you to everyone who's patronized our Upset store. Every dollar goes back to help someone else. So we just want to make sure you guys know that. What constitutes a cause? That's a great question.
Rodney, you can't get on in the last minute and start stirring up stuff. Yeah, Pastor, you can't be doing that. I think the last time we did something for Pine Forge, a student at Pine Forge.
We done something for like a student at Pine Forge who needed some financial assistance. But it could be a family in need, someone who's unemployed and, they're trying to make ends meet, or a situation. I don't think we developed.
Tally is like that dental plan.
I've been buked and I've been scorned.
Yeah, someone just needs a leg up. We're here to help. All right, guys. I know we keep saying we're ending, but thank you guys so much for being here. We'll be back next week. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Somebody told us that our tagline, I need to change our little tagline, which really isn't a tagline.
Which tagline is that one?
The one that I always say at the end, that we'll see you back here same time, same place, because if it's Sunday.
So, Tyler says this the day after Saturday.
No, it's ice cream with a cherry on top.
So we're going to put it out there to our audience. Help us come up with a great tagline or closing for the Upset Podcast that captures.
See you next week.
Deuces.
You said for Meet the Press, and I don't even watch Meet the Press. I don't even know where that came from.
Oh gosh!
All right, so help us out, guys. We want to hear what you have.
Oh, is it from Meet the Press? I didn't know that. I could never watch Meet the Press that long to get down to the end.
I watched that a lot when I was a kid, so maybe.
Oh, Walter Cronkite used to say at the end of his newscast, "And that's the way it is."
That's the way it is. Yeah,
it is. Yeah,
my dad says that too.
The black news used to end like this, and that the way it be.
Peace, or what? We could end it the way Donaldson ends things. What did he say? Peace and love.
Peace and love. Yeah. That is a great way to end things.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. That's what this is all about, right?
Well, whatever way you want to end it, end it.
See you next week. Great one.
No, end it our old way. Go ahead, end it our old way.
Okay, until we find something new. Yeah. Well, we'll see you back here, same time, same place, because if it's Sunday,
it's ice cream with a cherry on top with syrup.
This
is why this doesn't work. See you guys.
Right.